For many people that were disabled, being in something as the freak show in the circus was kind of their only way to make money. Many disabled people didn't really have any other way to get a job because they just weren't accepted, or maybe they just literally couldn't work. And that's where they would find themselves joining the circus or being recruited. Unlike today, where we do have government funding, I mean, not everywhere has this, of course, but back then in like the 1800s, some of these people were joining the circus. It was so shitty for these people. Typically, these people were shunned from society. They weren't even considered human. They weren't able to make any kind of money to survive. Basically, if you had no money or you didn't have a friend or a family member who could take care of you, you pretty much were screwed. And most of these people would either be extremely exploited or they would be homeless and would die. These were people that were extremely shunned from society, and they just were exploited against their own will, or in a way, it was against their will. Maybe they did join the freak show by their own will, but technically it's not their own will because they really didn't have anywhere else to go. In the 19th century, freak shows became so popular. These freak shows showed anything from exotic animals or animals doing tricks, which usually was animals being abused, or, seeing fetuses and body parts in jars, or people with some kind of unique trait. And by unique, this could literally be something as you have a disfigurement, or maybe you're just not white. Literally, a lot of enslaved people were also in these shows because obviously to the white people back then, if you weren't white, you were completely different. You would also see people that had hormone imbalances or just, a lot of hair, such as the bearded lady, the werewolf man. You also would see, the conjoined twins. And honestly, there was so many different types of people that could join these. Some of these people were actually able to work, but they might have just not looked the part that people accepted, and so they weren't really hired. And so they would basically be forced to join these shows. These people were never seen as people. They were just entertainment, just to be gawked at. And then when these people were not in the show, they were extremely harassed and abused and just neglected like crazy. This was all for entertainment. Maybe for some people, this was something out of morbid curiosity, or people were interested in it. But obviously, people were not going to these shows because they were interested in learning about these people. They were there to look at these people like they were just exhibits, that they were animals, and that they were nothing. They were just something to look at. Eventually, as more medical knowledge and roller coasters and even movies started to become more popular, these freak shows began to die out. And then eventually, obviously, human rights and ethics kind of came into play. And now you don't really have this anymore, even though you could probably argue that we do have this still with TikTok, but that's a whole nother conversation. But eventually, even when these shows ended, the people that were still a part of this were left with the trauma. And that was exactly what happened to Joseph Merrick. This was his entire reality. He was showcased as the elephant man, half elephant, half monster. His humanity was completely stripped from him. He was seen as just this deplorable looking person. Joseph had this disfigurement where he had a lot of excess skin and almost as if he had tumors across his face and his body. He was completely treated just like a monster. When he wasn't in the show, he was harassed and mobs would come after him. But he didn't have anywhere else to go. He needed to make money, and joining the freak show was his best way, or was it? And today, we're going to talk about Joseph Merrick and what his life was like as the Elephant Man. Let me introduce you to the Decomposing Flower podcast. I'm your host, Jen. With me is Kira. In this podcast, we talk about all sorts of things that are kind of true crime adjacent or something that we find interesting. In this episode, there is going to be a lot of themes of ableism. So, if any of that is maybe something that's, kind of your life that you experience, maybe not the best episode, but, if you want to kind of check out another episode of ours, feel free to. We also do have a Google form that you can fill in if you have a case or a topic suggestion. We love to hear from you guys. All of our information is found online. We mean no harm to anyone. And if we do get anything wrong, feel free to let us know in the comments down below. And with that, I think we can kind of begin. So, Joseph Merrick was born in 1862 in England. From what it seemed is Joseph was actually developing fairly normal as a child until he was around 5 years old. Now, I don't know if he actually was kind of showing signs before that or if it was just kind of around this time when his parents started to notice. He began to have a lot of abnormal growths around his head and his skin. For example, his head was around 3 feet in circumference that had this sponge-like skin hanging from the back of his head and across his face. His jaw was extremely deformed, and when he got older, this kind of made it really hard for Joseph to speak or even show any kind of emotions. His right arm was extremely deformed. He had a fin-like hand that was around 12 inches in width, and his legs were also deformed, and as he got older, this stuff would just get worse and worse. Eventually, his hip began to have a lot of issues and he had to walk with a cane. It's highly estimated that he suffered from Proteus Syndrome, which is a rare genetic disease that causes overgrowth of someone's limbs, hands, feet, and spine. But of course, at the time, they didn't know what he had, but it's pretty likely that he suffered from this, and people still suffer from this to this very day. So the Merricks did go through a lot of grief in their lifetime. I mean, this was very common for people in the 1800s. Typically, you were having children die left and right. It just was very normal. And Joseph had a lot of younger siblings that did die. One of his brothers died from the smallpox, which was very common. His sister was also disabled, although I couldn't find a whole lot of information on her. But to make this all worse, Joseph would lose his mother at age 11. His mom, Mary, truly loved him. She saw him as her son and not this abomination that his father saw him as. She truly loved him and cared for him. And when she died, Joseph would go on to describe her death as the greatest sadness in my life. And to make this all worse, not even a year later, his dad would literally marry the landlady. That guy moved on very fast, and this woman was just like your evil stepmother. She rejected Joseph, and so did his dad. But they both did not like Joseph because, unfortunately, they just saw Joseph as a liability and a burden. During his teen years, Joseph tried to work. He actually worked as like rolling cigars. But because his hands were fairly deformed, he wasn't really able to do this that long. And so he started to work a job with his dad. I believe he was like kind of doing like salesman work. But because his deformities were getting worse, it was really hard for him to talk. He would kind of slur, and people legitimately were afraid of him. They saw him as just this monster. They would literally scream and run away from him, which is insane. But they also just did not know what he was saying, so he wasn't really able to make any money. And one day, Joseph came home and he didn't make enough money, and so his dad decided to just beat him. Because they truly just rejected Joseph, I'm not entirely sure if this was his idea or his dad, but he would eventually go and live with his uncle Charles, and he would end up working in a workhouse by the time he was around 17. So while he was working in this workhouse, it was just absolutely awful for Joseph. And in 1884, he would catch the eye of a showman named Sam Tor, who walked up to Joseph and was like, "You would be a great exhibit for the freak show." I can't really imagine that scenario of someone coming up to you and being like, "Hey, do you want to be in the freak show?"
Yeah, I was literally about to say, like, how would that conversation go? Someone walks up to you, be like, "Hey, man, you're such a freak." Okay.
and, like, just coming up to you and, like, telling you, "You look crazy. Why don't you join the show?" But, I mean, maybe for Joseph, he thought that this would be a better way for him to make money, and, I mean, it would be easier on him in the sense of he didn't really have to physically do a whole lot, even though he was, like, going to shows, but obviously, this would do a lot to him mentally. So, he, of course, did take the opportunity, and he would join the freak show. He was exhibited as the Elephant Man or half man, half elephant. This was such a common exhibit for people. If you just had any kind of deformity that looked like an animal, you know, you had the Snake Man, which was literally a guy that just had no limbs, and I guess he could kind of move like a snake. So I guess he was the Snake Man. You had the Werewolf Man, and there was another one I saw that just was so disturbing to me. There was like the Ape Woman or the Baboon Lady, and it literally was just racist because she clearly wasn't white and they were just being racist assholes. But
Oh my god, that's wild.
yeah, and it just makes me so sad. Like when I do look at a lot of these people at the time, like they just weren't like obviously they weren't treated like people, but just seeing the way their humanity was just taken from them. And for Joseph, he was exhibited as just this freak of nature. He's the elephant man. Oh, come see this guy. He's the elephant man. But he actually had a lot of success in terms of money in the show. People were obsessed with seeing this man. And even when you look at some of the posters are really crazy because they have him like he has an elephant head, but he doesn't really have any features about him that made him look like an elephant, except for I guess he kind of had some skin that was a little bit wrinkly, I guess, that kind of resembles an elephant. So yeah, he actually had great success, but of course, he was severely neglected and abused and just treated like shit by the public. And he usually would wear this cape that would kind of cover himself so people couldn't really see him because, of course, when he was in public, people were afraid of him. And instead of people just being, you know, afraid and just maybe looking the other way, they would just like harass him and get a mob and go after him and just severely be crazy, I guess. So one show actually had him travel to London where he was exhibiting right across the street from the London hospital. And this actually caught the eye of a lot of medical students and doctors because they were intrigued by how he looked. They wanted to know what was going on. So there was this guy named Frederick Treves or Treves. I don't know how to say his name. He was a surgeon and he saw Joseph and he actually was fairly interested in Joseph's condition. And he seemed to be like one of the only people that kind of truly saw Joseph. So at this time, Joseph's deformities were getting very extreme. His head was measured to be around 36 inches in circumference. He couldn't really walk, he couldn't talk, but despite all this, he seemed to be very healthy despite all of this. So Frederick had Joseph be presented to the Pathological Society of London, and after this show, Frederick was like to Joseph, "Oh, I want to present you to other people." But Joseph, he finally like stood his ground. He was like, "No, I'm not doing that," because this event was really horrible for Joseph. I think because they treated him just such like a monster, he would go on to describe that he felt like an animal in a cattle market. I feel like maybe when he was in the show, maybe he would get into the mindset of I'm in the freak show, but maybe when he was being presented at like a show for a bunch of medical staff that he probably just felt worse. I'm not too sure. He was basically like, I'm not doing that anymore. I don't want to do that. I'm tired of being seen as a creature and not a man. Eventually, these freak shows were not as welcomed in Britain at the time. They just kind of were losing their interest. More people were becoming aware of medical conditions. I feel like once you kind of understand why someone has something, it's not as interesting, even though it's like really crazy at a time period that this was a thing. But eventually, Joseph would be moved to Belgium, but the shows in Belgium weren't really a success. And this is literally where Joseph's life really took a turn because his manager literally robbed him of his entire life savings and left him in Belgium. This man cannot speak. He is extremely disabled. He doesn't have any money now, and he's just left in Belgium. I cannot imagine what that would have been like for Joseph, but he did manage to get a ship back to London. I can't imagine like your manager having you go somewhere and then being like, okay, I'm gonna take all your money, bye. Like, that's crazy. So, when Joseph did get back to London, he was actually extremely harassed by the crowd. They saw his features and it just caused this giant mob to the point that the police were actually alerted and they went over to try and calm down the crowd and they were trying to talk to Joseph, but of course they couldn't really understand him. So they did manage to find Frederick's business card on Joseph and they were able to get Joseph back to the hospital. But the London hospital couldn't really do anything for Joseph because they didn't really have the medical knowledge of what was going on. So they were like, we really can't keep you here. So since the hospital was unable to take care of Joseph and the freak show wasn't really in business anymore, or they just weren't as popular, Joseph was kind of left to do nothing. And so one of the chairmans of the hospital, his name was Carl Grom, he actually tried to find a hospital for Joseph, but he couldn't find anything. So he ended up actually publishing an article in the Times where he was asking for donations and if anyone could actually help Joseph get some money just to give him somewhere to live. And this actually did work. A lot of people donated enough that it covered Joseph for the rest of his life, so he would never have to work. And with these donations, he was actually able to renovate a few rooms in the London hospital to kind of make his own little home. I find this kind of interesting because, he was treated like shit when he was in public, and then there's people that are donating, and I always wonder how many of those people were donating so they can look good, or were people just treating him like shit because other people were treating him like shit? I always wonder about that, but I guess people did really care and they donated a lot. He actually even got attention from a lot of the upper class people of Britain and even the Princess of Wales. I guess she would kind of pop in and help Joseph and like they would kind of come in and take care of Joseph. I don't know how much of that was legitimately charity work or if they really did care. Because I mean, maybe these people did see this and they were like, oh my God, my heart breaks. But these donations really did help Joseph, and he was able to kind of spend his days just living his life as much as he could. He would visit the theater, he would make trips to the English countryside and try and spend the last bit of comfort Joseph really had. He would also spend a lot of his time trying to write poetry and even prose. The only person Joseph could really talk to was Frederick, because Frederick was really the only person who could understand Joseph. By the time Joseph was 27, he kind of wanted to spend one night like everybody else. For Joseph's entire life, he was not able to sleep because his head was legitimately too heavy for him to lay down. It would actually crush him. But he just wanted to be like everybody else. On April 11th, 1890, Joseph was actually found laying down and he had died from a crushed spinal cord due to his head falling back when he slept. That would have crushed him and it killed him at the age of 27. He wanted to be like everyone. He wanted to be seen like a person. He didn't want to be seen like a monster. Joseph was more than an exhibit. He was more than the Elephant Man. He was Joseph Merrick. He wasn't half man. He wasn't half elephant. He was a man rejected by society. Someone who really just had nothing. Joseph, to this very day, is actually still treated like an exhibit. You can actually go and still see his skeleton, and it's still on display for people to gawk at and look at, just like they did when he was alive. He is still kind of treated like this folklore story of, did you hear of the Elephant Man? And so I have to ask a question for anyone watching this. Did you click on this video because you were interested in learning about the Elephant Man, or were you wanting to know more about Joseph the Man?